Hello, this is Julius from Basic Financials. Today you're going to talk a little bit about claiming expenses against your income for tax relief. Now relates if you're an employee of a business. Now this is obviously different from when you're self-employed, and the rules are a fair bit tighter, a bit stricter. But especially in these times where you might be working from home, you may well be having extra expenses. Now, the first thing to say is that if your employer refunds you those expenses directly, then there's obviously nothing to claim. You're only going to be claiming something for tax relief if you haven't had it reimbursed to you by your employer. So that's the first thing to note. So probably the first thing you want to do is, if you have extra expenses, either direct or additional costs, for example, additional electric, additional gas and cleaning and things like that, maybe the thing to do would be to negotiate something with your employer, and they might pay you a fixed amount as a reimbursement of that expense. Now, the government have given a rate. It used to be £4 a week that your employer could pay you without any tax consequences whatsoever, or national insurance come to that. They could pay you £4 a week. They've just recently, from the 6th of April 2020, increased that to £6 a week. It's still not very much if you're working from home. And that £4 a week or £6 a week applies even if you're only working from home for part of the year, or part of the week even. So really, if you're working from home all of the time, it would be reasonable to pay more than that, but HMRC haven't done anything other than that rate. So from the 6th of April 2020, £6 a week, the employer can pay you as a reimbursement and not have any tax consequences at all. In other words, they don't have to deduct tax, they don't have to declare it on a return of benefits, you don't have to keep evidence of your expenses. But, as I say, that's not necessarily very much. Now, it could be that your employer says, OK, well, I'll give you an extra £100 a month in your pay. Now, if they do that, then that's great, because it will cover your costs. But that pay will be subject to tax and national insurance. And therefore, if you've actually got £100 worth of expenses, you're going to need to claim that as an expense. So that you get the relief for it. Now, unfortunately, you wouldn't get national insurance relief for it, but you would get tax relief. Now, the important thing is that if you're going to claim more than that £6 or £6 a week now as expenses, and then you need to keep evidence of how you've come to those costs. Now, the sorts of things you might claim for, technically, the expenses are supposed to be what they regard as wholly, exclusively and necessarily in the performance of your duties as an employee. So it's an expense that you have to incur in performing your duties. So not even to get you ready for performing your work, but actually in performing your duties. So that definition is very tight. Now, it could be that HMRC would be more reasonable, but they don't have to be. And you could argue that they shouldn't be, because it becomes different depending on what tax office is looking at your affairs. But anyhow, I mean, the thing to do is to try and be reasonable with what you're claiming. If you're working from home all the time, then you can claim back a proportion of the costs for running your house. So let's say you've got one room in your house that you, on the majority of time, you're using as your office. Say you've got 8 rooms in your house and you've got one room as your office. You could look at all of your expenses, like the electric and gas, water, possibly water, not sure, telephone, all things like that. Things that are not mortgage interest, but the repairs, maintenance, cleaning, washing. So have a look at all of the costs that it takes to run the house. And maybe in that example, maybe 1/8 you might decide is part of the running costs for the house, and you could claim that back. Now, there are going to be other expenses that you might incur directly for your employment. For example, you might need to buy a piece of equipment, and you might need to buy a computer. If you do that, then you can claim what's called capital allowances on that computer. And I've got another video on capital allowances, but if you use that computer 100% for business, then you would be able to claim, for example, if you buy a computer for £1,000 that's for business, you could claim £2,250 as a tax relievable expense against your employment for the first year. Then in the next year you'd claim 25% of what's left, so 750, 25% of 750, and so on and so on. If it becomes worthless, you need to get another one, and then you would write it off to nothing and claim the balance at that point. And then when you get a new one, you would be claiming on that as well. Now, there is actually something called the annual investment allowance. So you could actually, on most cases, if you for an employee, because the annual investment allowance is pretty high, it's about it's about £250,000. It's £1 million at the moment, but it was £250,000. So you're not going to be spending that, hopefully, for home stuff. So you could actually claim the annual investment allowance, get the whole lot back in 1 year if you wanted to. It might be that you don't want to. Be careful, because if that took you down, for example, if it took you down your income down to below the tax threshold, then you wouldn't want to be claiming all of it. But that's a whole other thing. Now, the way that you claim these expenses, or the way that you get tax relief, is the amount of the expense that's not being reimbursed by your employer would come off your total income, and then your tax would be worked out on the rest. So, for example, if you're a 20% taxpayer and your income is $20,000 and you have £1,000 expense, that would mean would have paid tax at 20% on £1,000 more than you needed to. So, in other words, you'd have a £200 refund to come, or if HMRC have taken account of that expense in your tax code, it would mean you'd be paying £200 less through your PAYE. The way to inform HMRC, there's a form called a P87, I think it is, that you can complete to show what expenses you've been incurring. Or if you prepare a tax return, you can do it on your tax return itself. There's an area within the employment section for claiming expenses. Now, you can go back, if this has happened for the last 4 years, you can claim employment expenses for the last 4 years. The deadline being, so for example, if you've got 2016-2017 tax year, which ends on the 5th of April 2017, you have to file a tax return. Normally, if you do a tax return by the 31st of January 2018, then you've got 4 years from then to claim. So you've got 4 years from the filing deadline to actually make a claim. That probably, if you re-listen to that, you'll probably get it. But yes, there's 4 years from the 31st of January after the tax year that you can go back. So it's worth doing if your expenses have been significant. Yeah, I hope that helps, especially in these times where people are working from home and have been probably for maybe 2 months, so you might have some expenses to claim. Yeah, if you could like and subscribe as usual. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them in the box below. There's some quite useful information on the internet again about this, so if you want to look in more detail at it, do research it online. Yeah, I hope that helps. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.